Hi, Chris Dawson here, again at the Delivery Conference in London today, and I'm here with Craig Summers of Manhatten Associates. So, Craig, tell us a little bit about Manhatten and what do you do at Manhatten Associates?
Thanks, Chris. Great to be here. Yes, Craig Summers from Manhatten Associates. I'm the UK Managing Director for Manhatten Associates and have been in place for the last 5.5 years. At Manhatten Associates, we've got a long history of working with retail and wholesale customers on their supply chains, in particular warehouse management systems, transport management systems and order management systems.
Fantastic. I'm glad you're in the supply chain because we're at the Delivery Conference today and there's been so much going on in the world, external factors impacting business. We've had the pandemic, we've got a war in Ukraine, we've got the energy crisis, and even just a couple of years ago we had the Suez Canal with a boat stuck in it, all impacting the supply chain. So are we going to continue to see this sort of disruption? Is this the new norm, or are things going to settle down? And what can companies do, and what have been doing so far to limit the disruption? Because obviously supply chain disruption for a retailer, potentially no stock next Christmas.
Yes, and if the goal of a retailer is to make anything available in their supply chain available to their customers to buy, then any disruption can be pretty catastrophic very quickly. So I can't predict what could happen in the future. What I would say is, for years and years, the tech industry talked about agility and resilience. But actually, until the pandemic, until recent times, one could argue there wasn't the real need for it because things didn't change a lot. E-commerce created disruption that people had to respond to, but the pandemic created catastrophic change in how we all lived our lives for a period of time. So my view and my advice to any retailer or anybody with a complex supply chain is, do they have the confidence that the systems they have in place will enable them to be agile and resilient to whatever happens next? If we knew what happened next, I guess we would be in a different place. But
fair enough not to predict the future, because that's a bit of a stretch. But what kinds of things have you seen companies doing over recent years, either through the pandemic, the war, the Suez Canal, the bottleneck? What have companies been doing to kind of mitigate that and to build more robustness into their systems?
So if I take a step back, one of the strategic decisions we made with our software was to re-platform it, but not just re-platform, to rewrite it from the ground up to operate in the cloud. That takes away, first of all, our customers' dependence on in-house systems in in-house infrastructure where they need a lot of people to feed, love, water and understand it, as well as keeping it all up to date. And that re-platforming to what we call a microservices architecture has allowed us to provide quarterly updates for our software. And that has meant, as things have changed and things have been required, we can introduce new functionality really quickly to enable them to cope with the changes. So a nice example, for instance, we introduced in our order management system, Manhattan Active Omni, curbside pickup. So during the pandemic, when nobody wanted to go into the store but still wanted things and perhaps couldn't get it delivered, they could literally pick it up at the curbside, and we were able to do that in a matter of weeks, whereas in the old world it would have been a very difficult thing to do. I give that example because if you don't have an infrastructure with that kind of adaptability and agility, it's really hard to introduce things like that to cope with the unknowns we have ahead of us.
And talking about curbside pickup, or now we're back to more regular times, we'd probably call it click and collect. You actually have to get out of the car and go to the store. But sustainability has become a bit of a buzzword, and that click and collect and not having someone drive to your house, but I don't quite get it, but you drive to a store instead in many instances. Sustainability is important. We've got to get greener and become more ecologically responsible. How's this impacting the supply chain sector, and what advice can you give to companies who are looking at their responsibilities and thinking, okay, we're making all this stuff, we're moving it around the world, what can they do to become more sustainable?
It's a really interesting one, isn't it? And I think we all as consumers, and the great thing about the area we're in, we're all consumers as well as perhaps in the supply side as well. But we all recognise we have a problem. And actually it's twofold, because there's clearly there's a massive environmental problem that the world is trying to understand and deal with, and frankly doesn't seem to be dealing with quick enough. And there's also, from an economics point of view, the pressure on fuel prices really changes the way people have to do things. Now, if I look at some of the things that we've been addressing, how much air is driven round in a vehicle. It's just a crazy thing, isn't it? How efficiently is a vehicle packed against delivery, packed against how often do we all sit at home and have multiple deliveries, even from the same company, let alone from multiple companies. So I think there's lots of things can be done like that. I think the general use of resources in the whole supply chain is something that we could probably take a step back. I see room in the future for even companies that are competing. There's certain co-opetition perhaps in place where it makes sense to work in a joined up way on some parts of the supply chain, even though it wouldn't be perhaps for the customer facing part of it.
And I guess we're already seeing that, but not necessarily through the competitors coming together, but things like Sainsbury's and Argos. You can now, Argos are kind of in most Sainsbury's stores, but that's because of an acquisition. But how nice would it be to see businesses coming together like that and being able to utilise each other's supply chains to actually get goods locally?
I think a really nice example is somebody we've been working with for a long time, and it was at the delivery conference earlier today, but Asda and their to you service, where they're acting as really parcel collection and dispatch for multiple other retailers, because they have the physical infrastructure of the Asda store where people will come along. So to be able to do something else where you might not have considered it possible is a really powerful thing, and perhaps a really thoughtful environmental consideration as well.
And I think also, if we just look at post offices and the role that they're having nowadays, they're becoming more parcel shop, multi-carrier parcel shop. I think there's a lot of scope for, rather than just go and pick up my Royal Mail parcel, maybe pick up one from DPD, one from Royal Mail, one from Every, for example. And it makes sense that I go and pick up all of my parcels in one place, whether it be an Asda or a post office or wherever, than have 3 or 4 different vans coming to me. So this is all very interesting. That probably brings me on to the next topic of interest, which is kind of the software behind it you were alluding to, but more than just the software, also robotics and AI. People have been saying it's going to become a game changer for a long time, and especially with ChatGPT and everything coming up. But is this the year that technology is going to become the norm, and not just a software solution, but intelligent software solutions?
And I'm going to suggest it's evolutionary rather than revolutionary. What's been happening has been happening kind of step by step over a number of years. I'll start with robotics. I think that's something that it wouldn't necessarily replace historic automation in a big distribution centre, because that's something that's part of the infrastructure, but it is something that can be introduced very quickly. And even the concept of robots as a service, when there's a lot of pressure and lack of availability of people, then the robots are very complementary to the people there, particularly in kind of burst times and pressurized times.
And I guess, to be honest, even if you're talking the typical carrier distribution sortation hub, you could view all of the conveyor belts just as one big robot, because it's scanning the parcels and making decisions itself.
Absolutely, and the inefficiency of a picker having to push a trolley a distance back to somewhere, where that lends itself very much to a robot. One could argue a straightforward, simple task, but a very important task. It has to be done, and it really lends itself to a robot, and as I say, can be introduced very quickly. I think what goes with that, and what we've been observing, there's a couple of things, one of which, that integration to the warehouse management system has to be really straightforward, and it has to be done in a way that understands the people working there. You can't have robots, you can't have a situation where the pickers are waiting for the robot,
Yeah.
because that then doesn't enable the efficiency. So the systems, and it's an approach we've very much taken, that the warehouse management system has to be able to understand how to balance between person and machine. Because if you don't get that balance right, then you don't get the efficiency that you need, and actually you can create a fairly chaotic situation without doing that. The other thing you mentioned about AI, we've been putting a lot of machine learning into our systems to really understand how the operation works. If you think about the evolution of the DC, it was very much for retailers to fulfill stores, so known quantity to stores, and then suddenly e-com came along. We as consumers said, oh, that's great, we're going to completely mess up your process and order one thing to be delivered tomorrow. And that did a lot of change on the pressure of people working in warehouse and the warehouse operation. So now we've brought in a lot of technology that really learns how the warehouse operation works, learns how people can respond to things later in the day. Through technology called order streaming, we're able to really allocate tasks right up until a quite a late part of an operation to still fulfill orders that come in towards the end of the day required tomorrow. And in the old world, that would have been a really difficult, inefficient thing to do. But through clever use of understanding and machine learning, and using artificial intelligence to say, okay, so how should that go? What can we do? Then that's a really nice way of really kind of bringing the old and the new together in one place.
So thank you so much. We covered quite a lot here, from sort of the disruption of pandemic and war to the disruption of robotics and AI. But I want to thank you so much for your time. And if people do want to find out more, where can they find out more about Manhattan Associates?
manh.com.
Perfect, manh.com. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you.